So welcome to Eastern Circle's fifth conference already, this time in partnership with Armenia's Caucasus Resource Center. Today we'll be exploring the state of affairs in Armenia 3 years after the 2018 Velvet Revolution. To start with, our editorial team has curated 4 prescient topics that will help gain insight into the situation in the country. Afterwards, we will have a panel discussion on a series of in-depth themes, which is the main portion of the session. And finally, we will make sure to try to treat any questions you may have. We would like to ask you to please write them down in the Zoom or the Facebook live chat. Our team will collect them and we will do our best, along with the keynote speakers, to answer any questions you may have. As a reminder, I ask you to please mute your microphones too. Before jumping into the editorial insights, we would like to share with you that in the last 24 hours, Armenia's Prime Minister has removed a senior military official from office. This prompted 40 high-ranking military officials to request the Prime Minister's resignation, what has been described as an attempted military coup, with both pro- and anti-regime demonstrations ongoing in the capital Yerevan and elsewhere. The situation is still unfolding. The discussions today will therefore touch upon these recent evolutions, but as the situation remains clouded, is unresolved, and of course very recent, we of course cannot share anything with certainty. So let's begin. Armenia is one of the 3 South Caucasus republics. Its geopolitical and geographical situation is complex. Landlocked, it borders both Turkey and Azerbaijan, 2 hostile nation states. Iran, another neighboring country, lies to the south, but remains an international pariah. Only Georgia remains as an access to the outside world, but Russia in particular. Armenian politics are equally complicated. Following a referendum in 2015, the country turned to a parliamentary system. Then, 3 years later, Armenia experienced a non-violent political transition, referred to as the Velvet Revolution. The leader of the demonstrations was Nikol Pashinyan, a journalist and perceived as a relative outsider. He rose to power and became prime minister in May 2018, and still holds the position today. Economically, poverty and unemployment remain high, contributing to a continuous emigration of often well-skilled and highly educated Armenians in search of better livelihoods elsewhere. Moreover, near the end of 2020, Armenia fought a war with Azerbaijan over what Armenians often refer to as the Republic of Artsakh. It is also known as Nagorno-Karabakh in international circles. The breakaway state is a key point of contention, as is claimed by both Azerbaijan and Armenia, but is de facto independent. Having lost a large part of the region to Azeri forces, Armenian politics are in upheaval, as the government under Pashinyan is blamed for what is considered a humiliating defeat. Certain experts now believe that the pandemic and the military loss indicates the end of the democratic transition that started in 2018. This, of course, is also leading up to the events today, and is also the key theme of our conference with you this evening. And now Eleanor will explore some of the political issues facing Armenia.
Indeed, the new upheaval against Pashinyan is triggering the very sensitive question of the potential rehabilitation of the former elite, which we refer to as the Karabakh clan, and which is embodied by Armenia's first 3 presidents, Levon Ter-Petrosyan, Robert Kocharyan, and Serge Sargsyan, which are all former figures of the Karabakh movement in 1988. At the peak of the conflict back in October 2020, Kocharyan and Ter-Petrosyan overcame past enmity to orchestrate a joint comeback to the political scene by requesting Pashinyan to send them as Armenia's official envoy to Moscow to negotiate the peace with the enemy, which eventually did not happen. But still, since then, the two have been capitalizing on their former position of presidents of Armenia to enhance their legitimacy and to take advantage of Pashinyan's current difficult situation. Robert Kocharyan has been already very vocal about his intention to run in the next elections, but he's still at the moment facing trial on charges related to his mass repression of the 2008 demonstration in Yerevan. Ter-Petrosyan, on the other hand, is acting more in the shadows, but for instance, he has managed this past month to hold direct discussions with Russian ambassador to Armenia, Sergei Koperkin, over the very sensitive questions of prisoners of war. Eventually, this whole situation has created an unexpected momentum for another political figures of the Karabakh clan, Serge Sargsyan. He gave his first interview last week since he was overthrown by Pashinyan's Velvet Revolution 3 years ago. During this interview, he has shown his frank intention to be fully rehabilitated, notably within the Republican Party. He has accused, of course, Pashinyan of treason and gave alternative facts regarding the overall peace negotiation process with Azerbaijan. But most importantly, he gave himself several excuses related to his own hold on power back in 2018. Of course, this sensitive question of the rehabilitation of the former political elite will be addressed today in discussion with our distinguished speakers, and notably in the light of what happened today in Yerevan.
But of course, we cannot just analyze the domestic politics, especially in the context of the 2020 ceasefire agreement. Gabriela, I thereby invite you to analyze the geopolitical aspects as well.
Thank you, Dylan. Indeed, the third war in Nagorno-Karabakh was ended thanks to a ceasefire agreement brokered by Russia. Russia, which is actually one of the three Minsk Group co-chairs. The Minsk Group is the OSCE organ in charge of the settlement of the conflict. However, this ceasefire agreement was prepared through parallel negotiations by Russia. The final document does not even mention the Minsk Group and has allowed Russia to deploy its peacekeepers on the ground, in breach of the neutrality principle it should respect as a co-chair. Let's also remind that this agreement was promptly concluded in the midst of the American presidential campaign and a worldwide pandemic. It is thus often regarded as a humiliation for the American, but also the French co-chairs, whose representative to the Minsk Group lagged behind their Russian counterpart with a very limited access to information during the conflict. So for all this reason, some experts argue that the Minsk Group is another war casualty and start to question its survival. That is why we decided to look back quickly in history to see if this multilateral platform could survive the shock. So first, back in the first war in Nagorno-Karabakh in the 90s, Russia was already at the very center of the negotiations between the belligerents. First, through the failed 1991 agreements, then with the Bishkek Protocol, which was signed in May 1994. Needless to say, Russia had a specific role in this conflict because of the presence of Soviet weaponry and soldiers who joined the Karabakh or the Azerbaijani side, but also due to a controversial military operation that was led in 1991. Finally, the peace process led by Russia was put into the multilateral table in 1996, when Moscow became the third co-chair of the Minsk Group. However, in today's Caucasus, Russia is no longer the game master, as Turkey's influence is growing. But despite the current tensions between Russia, the EU, and the US, Moscow might consider that having to moderate Turkey's appetite through the OSCE Minsk Group would be easier than alone. Indeed, let's have in mind that Turkey is only an observer state within the OSCE platform, but surely is the main competitor for Russia in this new great game. The mandate of the Russian peacekeeper is to be renewed within 5 years. By that time, we'll see if the Minsk Group might be back in the game.
Well, first, the discussion on Armenia cannot be complete without also looking at the Armenian diaspora. As mentioned, Armenia continues to face waves of emigration, of which the post-genocide is the most infamous, scattering Western Armenians, also known as what is today Eastern Turkey, all over the world. During the Soviet era, both Western and Eastern Armenians emigrated to the Western world, while in the post-independence one, especially Eastern Armenians searched for new livelihoods in Russia in particular. As of today, an estimated 70% of the around 10 million Armenians live outside of the country. Relations between these groups and Armenia are complex, as each has different priorities and successful cooperation is scarce. Earlier waves have been largely assimilated into their new home countries. They still view the world through an Armenian-Turkish prism and prioritize the recognition of Nagorno-Karabakh, while most Armenian nationals focus on Azerbaijan rather than Turkey today. This diaspora is also richer. Many Paris or LA-based Armenians have incomes which are dozens of times higher than those back home. The lobbying and financial efforts go to international recognition of Nagorno-Karabakh's independence. This can be seen by the donations in 1 month of the 2020 war, surpassing all funds collected during the 2 decades before. While this is a key issue for Armenians themselves, the country has actually never recognized Nagorno-Karabakh as a state. And now, these first waves of emigres are even more disappointed with Armenia's defeat in the 2020 war. On the other side are the estimated 1.5 million Armenians who have left since independence. Their priority usually lies in finding better livelihoods and economic prosperity abroad. They are often emigres working in Russia, with 60,000 people leaving each year, Remittances still represent 12% of GDP, although down from 22% only 15 years ago. Many in this exodus are highly educated Armenians, with over a third having university degrees. The Armenian government is thus faced with a serious brain drain and ongoing immigration issues. The group is more disappointed with the lack of economic prospects in their home country. Here, the earlier waves of emigres could assist with their financial resources and technical expertise. Although once again, cooperation is limited and difficult due to different priorities. Finally, the continued emigration and the diaspora's assimilation in the Middle East, the West, and elsewhere has been described as a white genocide and poses a key problem for the Armenian government. Another problem and potential solution is Armenia's relations with Russia, which is the key security and economic partner of Armenia.
Well, indeed, Dylan, because since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Armenia and Russia have become close partners. However, if Armenia plays a very specific role in the Russian security architecture in the South Caucasus, the relationship between the two has never been balanced, but rather one-sided or asymmetrical. So together, let's have a very quick overview at those relations. After the independence of Armenia, Russia has acquired key sectors of the Armenian economy, enabling the Kremlin to keep Armenia vulnerable by pushing Yerevan toward an economic model marked by limited competition. Armenia became each time more dependent on Russia for the delivery of gas, weapons, but also goods. Besides that, Armenia could also rely on Russia for its security, being an OTSC member and allowing Russian troops to be stationed in Gyumri and in the Yerevan air base. Moreover, Russia is the main destination for Armenia's migrant labor. This lasted for almost 2 decades, with Armenia's governmental party, the Republican Party, enjoying very close ties with Russia. Yerevan joined the Eurasian Economic Union in 2013, after Russia opposed its rapprochement with the EU. Later on, and as a response to Russia's weapons supply to Azerbaijan, Armenia finally signed the EU-Armenia SEPA agreement in 2017. And then, of course, came the Velvet Revolution, which can be seen as a real turning point in those relations. Because remembering the experience of the Euromaidan, Russia probably decided not to intervene in favor of its old political allies. And right after his appointment as prime minister, Nikol Pashinyan understood the need to reaffirm this friendship with Russia. However, his efforts and the efforts of his government to break down corruption and dismantle monopolies interfered with some Russian economic interest. The past 3 years, the rising tensions between the two were never quite visible nor obvious on the surface, but really understandable. For instance, looking at the January 2019 surge in the price of gas imported from Russia. And finally, the third war in Nagorno-Karabakh has reinforced Armenia's dependency on Russia and weakened the prime minister, as we see today with the protest. Russia's support to its ally had been limited, forcing Armenia to accept a ceasefire at certain conditions it would have never accepted before. This year, nothing qualifies better the Russian-Armenian relations than an asymmetrical partnership.
And that concludes the editorial team's insights, and we will now be moving on to the discussion panel, which is the main part of today's session. I'm very pleased to announce that we will be joined by both Ella Karagulyan and Taline Papazian. Ella is the program manager for the Data Initiative and the Caucasus Barometer for Armenia's Caucasus Resource Center, a renowned center of excellence in regional analysis. Having studied in Armenia and in Belgium, and with over 10 years of experience in conducting sociological research, we look forward to hearing your expertise, supported by the CRRC's data and analysis. Taline holds a doctorate in political science. In addition to being a well-known political scientist in France, Armenia, the US, and elsewhere, she's currently a professor at the University of Aix-Marseille and used to teach at Paris' Sciences Po University. She's also the director of the Armenian Peace Initiative and has previously worked for the Armenian Ministry of Defense. So her remarks and commentaries are widely followed. I'm looking forward to both of your insights and welcome both, and a very big thanks to joining us today. As we have a lot of topics to discuss, I would like to ask both of you to please be concise with your answers and mindful of the time. Additionally, please don't hesitate to respond to each other's comments or to build upon or even challenge what has been said either by the editorial team or by each other. And for those of you who are just joining in, or maybe missed the first few minutes, we really encourage you to ask questions in the chat, so either on Facebook Live or on Zoom, depending on where you're joining us from, throughout the channel, which can be a general question or addressed to one speaker. From our side, we'll be collecting the questions, and we'll have about half an hour, 20 minutes at the end to treat them all. To kick off the discussions, Taline, I would like to start off with 2 specific questions addressed to you. Then we will quickly move on to your perspectives, Ella. The Velvet Revolution is one of Armenia's key recent political events, if not the defining one, along the 2020 war and potentially the events today. So of course, we cannot lose sight of its significance. As Eleanor discussed earlier, Nikol Pashinyan has no personal ties with Nagorno-Karabakh, as opposed to all the former heads of state of Armenia. We're all born and or started their political career in the enclave. So this change in government implies a certain amount of change. Could you please expand upon what exactly has changed in terms of the decision-making processes in the different institutions? Who is part of the political elite? Who is part in the government itself? And have these different entities actually succeeded in implementing the long-awaited, eagerly awaited reforms since the new government's ascension to power in 2018?
Thank you. In answering your question, I will also have a short remark about the presentation of what you have called and what your colleague has called the Karabakh clan. And that will at the same time answer this question that you're asking now. We have to distinguish between the first president of Armenia, Levon Papazian, and the second and the third. When we speak about the Karabakh clan, as the leaders who were originally from the enclave and who then came to Armenia proper and had a political career there, that concerns the second and the third president, so Robert Kocharyan and CRRC. The first president is not from the enclave. The reason why you linked him to the Karabakh clan is because he actually became a national leader during the Karabakh movement, not the clan, the movement. And the movement that started in 1988 that was pursued until 1991. And that movement tackled 2 issues: the issue of the Karabakh issue, so either unification with Armenia was demanded, or then independence for Artsakh was demanded. And at the same time, and rather soon in the movement actually, the question of Armenia's independence. So these 2 issues form what we call the national movement of the end of the Soviet period, and on the wake of which the first president was elected in 1991. That's an important distinction. He was, however, very important because he made that call in bringing Karabakh leaders to decision-making positions in Armenia. So he's the one who asked Sarkisian to perform defense ministryship in 1993. So Sarkisian came from Karabakh in the middle of the first Karabakh War. And then he asked Robert Kocharyan, who was president of the Nagorno-Karabakh Unrecognized Republic, to become Armenia's prime minister, and that was in 1997. And these same 3 presidents had actually a very big internal disagreement on the Karabakh conflict and its way of resolution that led to the resignation of the first president in 1998. The internal conflict started in 1997. Levon Papazian resigned in February 1998. So by saying that, I'm now getting back to your question. It's not the first time Armenia has a leader that is not from the Karabakh clan. Nikol Pashinyan is the second one. Nikol Pashinyan indeed is not from that clan, and at the very, to be honest, when you look at the Velvet Revolution moment in Armenia, and when you look at his speeches during the Velvet Revolution, the Nagorno-Karabakh issue is almost, I would say, almost non-existent. It was not Nikol Pashinyan's main priority, main subject of reform at all. He was much more keen on embarking on anti-corruption fights, on making the processes more transparent, on having free and fair elections. So let's say on the internal fabrics of democracy. And towards the very end, maybe the last day, if I'm not mistaken, of the Velvet Revolution, he started to say a little thing or two about the Nagorno-Karabakh issue, but really not the at the forefront of his priorities. And that was actually the case even during his first 2 years as a premiership, until suspicions, either intentionally augmented or I would say authentic, genuine suspicions or genuine fear, came that maybe Nikol Pashinyan was not willing to defend the Karabakh cause as much as his predecessors were. Here we started witnessing more hardlined rhetorical sentences from the prime minister, but maybe we can come back to that later during later phases of our discussions. So a lot of things changed, yes, in his way of governing, in his way of well, first Armenia experienced its first free and fair and legitimate elections since the one, maybe the last one was the spring of 1999, when Vazgen Sargsyan and Karen Demirjian were prime minister and president of the National Assembly. So almost 20 years, yes. So a lot of changes. Hypothesis, my working hypothesis, maybe some of these changes were too superficial, not substantial enough, did not gelled into the institutions of the Republic.
Such as you mentioned the anti-corruption reforms of the free and fair elections.
Yeah.
Maybe this didn't go far enough, let's say, that it's still only the surface, or are there other examples that you think of more concretely that represent this?
No, very, very concretely, one problem that I have in mind was the reform of the, administrations were not deeply reformed as far as people were concerned. The civil servants, the staff. It's not that everybody was not doing its job properly. Well, maybe an internal audit would have been necessary in order to actually assess it. But Armenia has a crucial problem of cadre, and you mentioned that indirectly when you said brain drain, Armenia, immigration since the 1990s. Yes. And so every government who arrives and has an ambition to reform the way the administrations are working will very soon be confronted to that shortage of personnel and to low salaries and to let's say an environment that is not easily conducive to reforming the persons. Institutions at the end of the day are made of persons. So that is a very heavy problem, yes.
So yeah, we also see this in various sectors where people that were in the previous government, for example, they show up in potentially different position in the new government. This can be, for example, in the environmental aspect and the mining industry as well. That there is still some overlap as well between the governments to a certain extent.
Yes, I heard part of your sentences, but unfortunately not all. But let's get back on this maybe later. Hopefully it will get better.
For sure, of course. And don't hesitate to say I can easily repeat. So and then with regards to the reforms themselves, do you believe that this is still ongoing, or that this will be improved, or what is your opinion on the state of affairs?
It is very hard to answer that question, especially now after the war, and even more especially today after everything is going on. Before the war, even though some of the reforms in some of the sectors, for example, the judiciary system, that is a key component of reforms in Armenia, we have the impression that reforms were slowly progressing, sometimes coming to halts, and then restarting. It was not always a smooth progression. But it was not stopped. But to answer what is going to happen now, and do we still have a perspective today for to catch up with democratic reforms? It is very hard to answer you, because what is in danger now is the state itself. So I hope the next days will belie me. But if Armenia becomes or runs the risk of becoming a failed state, then any talk about democratization is sort of secondary and useless, because without a state properly functioning, no democratization can take place. And that is a very important thing to understand. Any democratization process needs to be sustained and is to be supported by solid state and solid state institutions. And the war and the collapse after the war has shown that some of these institutions have a very deep dysfunctions, and obviously, before resuming talks about democratization, this problem needs to be addressed. And in parallel with that, the question of snap elections and of, how do we get out of the institutional crisis that we have seen developing since the end of the war. So these two should be tackled in parallel.
Very clear. Also, the crux of the today's discussion as well that we would like to have is exactly to see this. So now moving on to the next part, also related to the reforms, which is more addressed to Ella. Of course, there was a strong demand for reform, which also due to the often difficult living conditions in Armenia. We mentioned the poverty rate and the unemployment rates. So looking at more the perspective of the Armenian citizens themselves, how is the perception of the quality of life evolved since 2018? So since and compared to the before the Velvet Revolution, regarding people's incomes, their personal freedoms, their political freedoms, and so on. And related to this, how is the confidence in Armenians in their institutions evolved between let's say before the Velvet Revolution, after the Velvet Revolution, and up until mid 2008, 2020, so before the war with Azerbaijan? And maybe we already have some information about how that the war has impacted these perceptions as well.
Thanks for the question. Good evening. I'm very pleased to be here. As Taline mentioned, it's very hard to assess the administrative reforms as well as the levels of income or change in the well-being of people in the span of 2 years, especially given the current situation with regard to pandemic that hindered the economy very severely, and the devastating war. So there was a growth in the GDP, a larger growth in the GDP in 2019, but all the indicators have, the growth has hindered a bit this year, of course, as expected. So speaking objectively of the effect of the well-being, eliminating the effect of COVID and war is as of now not possible, and also with regards to administrative reforms. Nevertheless, as far as the effect of the revolution is concerned, there was change in the perceived freedoms among the population. Armenia, for instance, improved its standing in the World Press Freedom Index, moving from 18th, I think, in 2018 to 60th rating in 2020. The same happened with the Corruption Perception Index, compared to 105th place in 2018. We moved to 61 or 60 in 2020. So I will be presenting some also numbers from the Caucasus Barometer survey. The data was gathered right before the start of the pandemic. It doesn't have the effect of this year. Nobody saw this year coming. It has just the effect of the revolution within 2 years. And as we can see, there was an increase in the number of people who think that people like yourself have the right to openly say what they think. Also, it has been higher also before. So the data compares, there's a time frame from 2008 to 19. There was a sharp decrease in the number of people that think that the government doesn't treat them fairly. From 2017, as we can see, to 2019, it goes down from 74 to 25%.
Huge impact.
It's a huge impact. And in the next slide, we can see that to back up what Taline said about the free and fair elections, on the snap elections in 2018, the vast 87% of the population thought that the elections were fair. When it comes to the perception of Armenia being a democracy among the population, again, we see quite an increase from 2017 to 19. Unfortunately, we don't have the data for this exact data a year after, so as of now, but I will be presenting some general trends based on other surveys. What happened to trust? So again, this is the effect of Velvet Revolution. So trust towards local government, president, parliament, and executive government. There was a sharp increase in the level of trust towards the president, the executive government, and the parliament. Not so towards local government. Trust towards army has always been high, starting from the very beginning of the data collection in the frames of Caucasus Barometer. Given that trust in the army is perceived not the institution, not the Ministry of Defense, but the, well, soldiers per se, right? So even now, trust in the army stays at the same level, even at higher levels. Trust towards police and political parties increased slightly after in 2019 compared to 2017, and the trust towards the court system was not much affected because also the reforms have been ongoing starting from the very beginning of the revolution. It's 3 years of trying to change the court system.
But it seems very clear there's a serious increase in trust for most branches. It is now to be seen for the army, particularly what will happen in the upcoming months, days even, how this will evolve, especially as they've been relatively politically neutral and now have actively taken a stand the last 24 hours.
Yes, however, usually the army is perceived not as it might still change, stay unaffected, the trust towards army, but it can be a separation, army versus the general staff, or so there's a distinction between the institution and the leaders, and then the soldiers, let's say. Trust towards social institutions, healthcare system, media, NGOs, ombudsman was not much affected in the span of the 2 years, as we can see from the graphs. What happened next? Given the very high expectations from the Velvet Revolution, and we know from data that some 84% of the population had very positive expectations from the Velvet Revolution, we would of course expect these numbers to gradually decrease the high levels of trust towards the executive government, parliament, and the president that peaked. But these are the trust in parliament and trust in executive government in the span of 10 years, 10, 11 years, and even before the 2018 events, we could actually predict to some extent the levels of trust going down gradually. So this green line, trust towards parliament, it has been steadily going down from year to year, and then it goes up in 2019.
Mhm.
The same happens with trust towards executive government.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry to interrupt. I believe, Taline, you wanted to jump in as well.
Yes, but it's an addition regarding the army. So Ella said very rightly that the trust that is expressed in the very interesting surveys, and thank you, Ella, for bringing all these visuals into the discussion. The trust in the army has always been as the army as an institution, but also the army as a sacred, as a non-touchable body of the Armenian nation. So that is very important. And I also want to add something here is that contrary to what maybe could be assumed, the defeat during the war has not made people suspicious of their soldiers. Quite the contrary, because if there is one thing on which it seems everybody agrees is that soldiers actually demonstrated willingness, commitment, and utmost bravery in the fight. So soldiers per se are sacred. The problem is that you should never confuse the persons and sort of, because it's sacred, then you never question it as an institution. Then problems can arise. Okay, but let's leave that for the moment. The second thing I wanted to say, and again, that is to follow up on what Ella was saying, is that even today, even when we had that statement from the general from the general staff, the Ministry of Defense also issued a statement, maybe a couple of hours ago. Yes, a couple of hours ago, appealing to moderation and calm, and reminding everybody that the army was a neutral institution, that it was not taking political stance, and that its mission was to defend the borders of the country and not to be politicized. That's an important declaration, and let's see if it is, followed up by a more restoration, towards sobering of minds, of spirits, which we can obviously hope for. That was something I wanted to add, and it's not the first time. It's not the first time. So the Ministry of Defense has, I could say, a record of maybe 3 or 4 times, at least in the history of Armenia, of post-Soviet Armenia, of sobering up the minds when it has tried to be used for political motives. Let's see what happens.
Okay, thank you. Ella, do you still have maybe in 2 sentences something to wrap up, or shall we move on to the next topic, because I'm conscientious of the time passing?
No, I will just so the next wave of the CV is at the end of the year, but looking at some other data that we have at our disposal, also the data that comes from other survey institutions, I can generally say that the trust towards the army was not much affected after a year after, so post-war period. Trust towards judiciary system, courts was low, as we saw, but it also stayed at the same level. Trust towards the healthcare system stayed at the same level, although there were 2 major events, first the pandemic and then the war, that the healthcare system had a stressful, let's say, performance, which could have affected the levels, which could cause some fluctuation, but at this point, it's at the same level, basically, as it was. Trust towards police is unaffected as well. There are some levels in the increase of trust towards the ombudsman, which is probably linked to their performance with the work of the political POs, prisoners of war, that a certain unconfirmed number of prisoners are in Azerbaijan currently. There was a decrease in the level of trust towards the local governance, which can be linked to their work during when providing support to the people temporarily moved from Ankara to Armenia during the war. because there was some government support in so shelters, food support, direct assistance, cash assistance. However, still the main support to the displaced people came from the general population and also from diaspora. And you mentioned the All Armenian Fund, the donations to All Armenian Fund. At the beginning, almost 30% of these donations actually this year came from Armenian citizens. So diaspora contributed the rest, but quite a share was also donations was made locally. And most importantly, what was affected by the war is the levels of trust towards the executive government, president, and the prime minister that have dropped, of course, but are still not on the levels of pre-Velvet Revolution. They are still higher than what was before, but of course they have dropped quite significantly.
This is clear. Thank you. Now, maybe moving on, also you mentioned the prisoners of war and the other key issues facing Armenians today. So maybe let's begin with Taline. We can see also, of course, with the events in the last 24 hours, what are the main issues faced by Armenia today? And then we can carry on to look a bit more in detail what are the topics actually affecting the citizens themselves.
I was saying, where should I start? There are so many issues that Armenia has to face today that I don't know where to start from. So among the many issues, obviously, coping with the consequences of the new status quo regarding Nagorno-Karabakh, but also regarding the new borders with Azerbaijan, the new borders that have tremendously gotten bigger as a result of the new situation on the ground. So that's one. The second is a very pressing issue for the society of Armenia, and that is the question of all prisoners of wars, civilian hostages, and the implementation of all the points that are contained in the November 9-10 statement. That's one important thing, very important. That's one very important package. The second, obviously, is economy, because between the COVID and then the war, Armenia's economy is in a dire situation, and local economists have not even started to grasp the full range of economic consequences that Armenia has to deal with. So from the complete bankruptcy of tourists in the year 2020, up to the destructions coming from the war, and the fact that a number of key assets are now not under Armenian control anymore. So huge economic problems. That's the second package. We're talking, very wide package with a lot of sub-contents, but just for the sake of clarity, I'm making them like headlines. Mm-hmm. And the third, maybe I should have put that second, if I were to draw a hierarchy, would be political stability. Because without political stability, none of this, none of the first, none of the second can be properly achieved. And then we have very important priorities of foreign policy. And if you want my personal opinion, I would like to see Armenia and Azerbaijan, for example, start, direct discussions, a direct dialogue to maybe start on building new types of relations between them. And the same would go on with Turkey. All this is a program for years, obviously, so none of this is going to get implemented soon. So soon, what needs to be done is political stabilization and the implementation of the key points that were agreed upon by the leaders of the states of Armenia, Russia, and Azerbaijan.
That's very clear. Ella, do we have some information that can back this up to see if that let's say the ordinary citizens themselves also share these worries, these concerns?
Before, unemployment has always been the main problem that has been reported to face Armenia. However, and as we can see from the graph, only 9% of the population was concerned by unresolved territorial conflicts. What has changed, and a drastic change happened here, is that more than half of the population now sees a threat to the security of the country externally, and see a risk of war, which means that security now has moved up this scale. And as a treat, Turkey has added as a security treat alongside Azerbaijan, according to research surveys, which was not on the agenda, let's say, before, but the involvement of Turkey in the conflict brought the Turkey up in the arena. So as of now, I think it's more the security issue, and maybe the events are evolving so fast that it can also be a question of political stability. However, as of today, there was not, of course, the events were labeled at some point as an attempt of coup. However, there is no direct military involvement or anything.
I also see that we've been getting some interesting questions, so we'll try to move on to that soon. But before we do that, we still have some other topics to look at, which is essentially also the key topic of today, let's say, which is the democracy in transition. And taking into consideration what you just explained, Ella, what the ordinary people think about, but also the more broader aspect as well. Can we say that the people still believe in Armenian democratic development, or has this basically been shattered and ended by the war, by the pandemic, and so on? Maybe Taline, I invite you to begin, and then afterwards, Ella, we can see if you have any comments to add.
Of course, as an emerging democracy, it would be expected that it would be labeled as weak to combat internal and external security issues, and that I think has obviously been the case. Some part of the population thinks that democracies shouldn't be a priority, let's say, because it does not guarantee security internally and externally. There is also a group of people, some part of the population, that blames, of course, the democratic developments to be the perpetrator of what happened, of the result of the conflict. But it's always, for instance, the former political elite. So is the current political elite. So it's hard to assess which side will outweigh. However, there are discussions, for instance, on whether Armenia should be a parliamentary, should have a parliamentary governance, or go to a semi-presidential, and this is on the agenda.
Thank you. Taline, can I invite you to build upon what Ella said, as well as share your own insights, please?
Yes. I cannot answer from the perspective of citizens, and Ella is, I mean, in a much better place than me to do that. But what I think we should do is draw a distinction between democracy and populism. So my informed guess would be that if today you go and ask random survey in the street that, you know, do you think that democracy is good for Armenia or not? Maybe based on some fatigue of, you know, excess of Facebook democracy. Sometimes Armenian citizen refers to Nicole Pashinyan style as Facebook democracy. On excess of some, what I would say is the populist aspects of this leadership, then some of the people that would be asked that question might answer, okay, no, we had our share, of that. However, I think that if you actually explain to people that you have democracy and you have populism, and these two are very different things, and that if you drop democracy, then you go back to, the widespread corruption, lack of freedom of speech, or restrictions on freedom of speech, on freedom of movement, on a lot of individual liberties that people actually got accustomed to very quickly in the span of these past 2.5 years or almost 3 years. And those are genuine steps forward that Armenia has made in a very short period of time. Armenia was never a full authoritarian regime. It was sort of a hybrid regime, illiberal democracy that is generally called that way. Now, in the span of these 2.5 years, it has become much more of a democracy. What is lacking is the substance of a mature democracy. But I have a lot of trust in the capacity of Armenian citizens to actually be aware of this distinction, maybe not on a theoretical level, but on a practical, on an empirical level. And that's also why they did the Velvet Revolution. And they came to the streets with full knowledge that, politics in general might be perceived as a dirty things, but that dirty things should not be confused with the state. And that eventually, at the end of the day, when you want a change of regime, you want it because you believe that your state should be preserved and go on and fulfill its mission towards its citizenry. Okay, so that's a very important point. That idea, that reality of the state has matured in the span of 30 years of post-Soviet Armenia. So that would be my informed guess on democracy. And one indicator of that is that in a Gallup survey that was made 6 days ago, was published 6 days ago, the most appreciated politician is still Nicole Pashinyan. So, and I think it's 43% of the respondents have answered the question, who would you vote for if the next election was next Sunday? And they would have voted for my step. So even with this tremendous catastrophe, and even with, pardon me for being very, maybe direct about this, but even with his blunders, he makes a lot of blunders, diplomatic, political, whatever. Even with the incompetency that at some level is non-debatable incompetency, sorry. Even with all this, he still has a significant share of popularity and of public appreciation. So, that says a lot about how much the former regime is despised, if not outright hated.
This is clear. And so, do you believe that the war will then actually conclude this feeling? Or it seems to me that this feeling has not left, that there's still the feeling is hope within the Velvet Revolution and in democracy and so on, that this will conclude, or that this will continue on in the upcoming period?
I just don't like making predictions. I consider that outside of my duty. But maybe if Ella has some surveys, she can have a better guess than me. So pardon me, but I will just, sort of throw her the ball. And Ella, if you could please have your informed guess instead of me, I would appreciate.
I will refer to the same survey which was open, and a survey commissioned by Gallup. It was a phone survey with not some 800 respondents. Where, according to which 44% of the population thinks that Pashinyan should resign. 37 thinks that he should stay in office. The problem here, well, not the problem, but so even if more people think that he should resign rather than he should stay, there is an alternative political power that has votes. So it's 33% actually, according to this survey, that would vote for him if there were, that would vote for the party actually, not for him, because there is a distinction here as well. So given the turnout, this 33% will be higher. Also, some around 40% are against everyone. And there is no other political force or party that will have, that is now, as of now, predicted to have even the minimal threshold to get into the parliament. So this, he still is the highest rated, as Taline mentioned, political power for politician. And given that we also have, there is a differentiation between a political party and the person. Usually in all the surveys, the predictions for the political party are lower than the factual results of the election, because people go and vote for the person. So if directly asked, who are you going to vote for, my step, the number will be much lower than if you ask, will you vote for this person?
We're also drawing to the situation in Ukraine. This is also similar with Zelensky's popularity compared to his party as well. But thank you very much. We have one more question we would like to treat before we go to the Q&A, because again, we have quite some interesting things that we'd like to bring up. So Taline, we'd like to ask two final questions, let's say, on the Nagorno-Karabakh situation and how this will go on. Even though we don't have to make any predictions, we can still take into consideration some insights, let's say. So the first is from an external point of view. It's quite surprising that Nagorno-Karabakh has never been recognized as being independent by Armenia itself. So this is the first, let's say, issue. Second is its refusal to compromise within the scope of the OSCE Madrid principles. Do you have any explanations that can explain why it's not being recognized?
Okay. Yes, of course.
Maybe, sorry to interrupt. Maybe in 1-2 minutes max, and then we can.
Okay, very quickly. Well, very quickly. Armenia leaders and Nagorno-Karabakh leaders sort of always agreed that if Armenia was to recognize Karabakh independence, it would put an end to the negotiations. Because it would show that Armenia is not ready to, discuss anything with Azerbaijan about the status, and that it would decide the status all by itself. So Armenians and Nagorno-Karabakh, again, leaders' common position on that was that Armenia should not recognize Nagorno-Karabakh's independence unless dramatic conditions or very exceptional conditions. And as we have seen, even the war apparently has not prompted conditions exceptional enough to make that move happen. So that has been a permanent parameter of Armenia's position on the NK issue. And to answer to your second, to be honest, there should be a thorough investigation on what exactly has the Armenian current administration refused in the Madrid principles. Because we know now that the position of Nikol Pashinyan was that he should come up with some sort of a new set of propositions to advance the discussions. But we don't have the substance of this. So either there is no substance, that is one hypothesis, or it has still not come up to the forefront of the public discussions, because that issue has also been a lot manipulated during the war in order to put more of the blame on the current administration of Armenia. So question mark. There has been, again, I repeat that there has been a lot of provincial, maybe I could call it that way, provincial statements on the part of the leadership of Armenia that send very wrong signals to the conflicting parties, to Azerbaijan and also to Turkey. And that has sort of antagonized positions that were already, let's not forget that, very much a pro-war in Azerbaijan. It's not something new that has sort of reached a climax, but it's not as if there was a genuine desire for peace during 25 years that has not, gotten through a successful conclusion, and that Nikol Pashinyan is the only one to blame for the fiasco. So just as a caveat.
Of course. So this also raises the question: to what extent do officials, both current and former, actually want to resolve the conflict in general?
Yes.
Which
former leaders, I think we have seen no desire to resolve. Otherwise, it would have been done, maybe, or maybe we would have seen more tangible. I mean, it's very easy to come after the defeat and say, oh, I was ready to sign a peace deal. And that, I went, okay, what has taken place during these 25 or 26 years of preserving the status quo? And again, I might be naive in saying that, but I think when there is a will, there is a way. And if we had seen a will on both sides, we would have seen also results coming from that. We haven't seen results coming from that.
Okay, thank you. I would suggest we move on to the Q&A, and at the very end, of course, we can see if there's any last things that you would like to share, Taline, or of course, Ella as well. So the first question that we would like to treat is one about the flow of refugees. So about coming from the 7 districts between Nagorno-Karabakh and the actual state of Armenia itself. And the question is, how many of these internally displaced people, these refugees, are residents who have been in Nagorno-Karabakh for years, or let's say at the very least since before 1995 or the independence movement in the end of the 80s? And how many are the people that actually came after 1995 that relocated there and then left Nagorno-Karabakh in these last few months? Do we have any insights, information on this? The question is open to the floor, so I will let either of you, of course, respond.
Okay, the date that is mentioned is 1985?
1995.
Oh, you mean after the ceasefire? Oh, okay. No. I mean, there might be exceptions to what I'm going to say, but yes, all these were residents from Nagorno-Karabakh before the first war. Some of them had relocated from other areas in Azerbaijan, so either immediately neighboring the former autonomous oblast of NK or from other cities in Azerbaijan, and had resettled in Nagorno-Karabakh at the very end of the Soviet period or at the very beginning of the independence period, so 1991. But so to answer, yes, they were all there before the first ceasefire.
I will just add that as of now, around 100,000 people have returned to Nagorno-Karabakh after the ceasefire, and some 50,000 stayed in Armenia. I agree with Taline. So I would assume that it's mostly people that have been there before the 95, because also the regions that have been handed to Azerbaijan were not as much populated. So the main population was Stepanakert and the regions that are. So I assume those are people, but we don't have numbers because we don't have the composition of those who stayed there, this 50,000, and those that returned.
And even if the numbers are slower for these less densely populated regions, how do you see the Armenian government being able to cope with these numbers, both in providing housing, accommodation, healthcare, and so on, and of course with the broader context of the ongoing pandemic? What can the Armenian government do?
So far, we haven't seen. We have seen some support. There were some government programs, direct assistance to those that lost shelter, or direct just one-time assistance those who do not work. But it's very, very limited in size. So I believe as of now, people are left on the support of common citizens, general population, and also on themselves.
So
most of them have returned. There's no conversation on housing or from the government yet. I believe maybe Taline will correct me if she has more information on this.
If the question is for people who might stay in Armenia, then I don't have information. But if the question is for people who came back or who went back, sorry, to Nagorno-Karabakh, then yes, there are budgets. There are funds from the Armenian state budget. There are funds from the Nagorno-Karabakh budget, but those two are linked. And there is help from Russian structures too to resettle. But if the question again concerns refugees or displaced persons, I'm not sure what term should be used in Armenia proper, then I don't know. I don't know what is being done.
Thank you. Maybe just to build upon this, you mentioned Russia as well, because of course we can't talk just about the internal politics within Armenia, or even Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan together. We also have to look at the broader picture with Russia. So maybe broader for both of you, how is the army and its elite capitalized on the high level of trust within Armenia for the army? Is there any kind of connection within the Armenian army with Russia? And from where do they get the high level of trust of the Armenian people in general, taking into consideration, of course, that they are defending the border first and foremost, but are there other relations with Russia that can influence their standing?
I'm not sure I understood everything properly, again, because of my bad connection. I'm sorry. If your question is there a relation between Russia and the high level and the high standing regarding the army? No, there is no that sort of connection. The high standing of the army was mainly built on the 1994 victory, quote unquote, in the Nagorno-Karabakh War. So after that victory, Armenians were, I don't want to use the term fanatics, but again, as I said earlier, the army was a sacred institution, but also because Armenia had very tangible security issues and still has, even more than before, very tangible security issues. So the army is paramount. Russia, well, they are, I mean, working and even more now, because Russia obviously is the main patron of Armenia now. If it was before, now it's even more the case, and those relations are also very active and important in the military domains, but that has nothing to do with the level of trust from the public towards the army. That has everything to do with the now perceived level of ability to ensure to respond adequately to the security challenges of Armenia, however.
Okay, that's clear. And then we mentioned also that the position of Russia has been improving within the Caucasus. It has reestablished itself as a key player, even more so than before. So what can the United States, what can the European Union do, taking this into consideration, to make sure that they're not losing entirely their influence? Because as Gabrielle mentioned before, they're being sidestepped by Russia during the Minsk agreement, and in general they weren't very reactive within the region the last few years. Right
now they are trying to sort of catch up the train, and it is very important that they actually do it, because well, Russia, as we all said, and we all agree on that, is in the position of the major player in the region. And the more leverage you will give, and the more Russia will take. So if you want to have balanced relations, and that is in the interest of all the states of the region, and to my, I think it's in the interest of Armenia, it's in the interest of Azerbaijan, and it's obviously, it has been a long time policy of Georgia, but it's also in the interest of all the states to have balanced relations with all the big players in the region. And Russia is a big player. And now it has a very active partnership made also of tensions, but a very active and manageable partnership with Turkey. And we have seen how Russia has tried and has actually sidelined every Western institutions or group. However, having said that, Russia has still an interest in showing that it is collaborating with Western institutions on some files, even more so now. And the Nagorno-Karabakh file remains a case of collaboration because it has nothing to do with NATO partnership. Sometimes it is presented as an East-West confrontation, but actually it is not an East-West confrontation. And that is also why Russia is willing to have this good, workable cooperation with Europe and with the US and in the format of the OSCE Minsk group. So everything is not lost, quite the contrary, and it should get activated.
Maybe to Elif, do you know about the public's perception with regards to the different groups? Have they changed? Is it maybe towards Russia? Has it improved, gotten worse due to its presence in Nagorno-Karabakh?
Generally, the performance of Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh is perceived as positive. So they are fulfilling their mission there, according to survey results. I don't recall anything else now on the sense of Russia, the support towards Russia.
Okay, first, just in case if you have anything that comes to mind, and maybe also then for both of you, Taline and Ella, what is the expected evolution of the Russian influence in Armenia, considering its presence in Nagorno-Karabakh, and the fact that this army now has actual boots in the ground in the what Armenia considers as the Republic of Artsakh, and not just in the military bases, I believe in Gyumri, amongst others. How will Russia's influence change in let's say in the upcoming years, or how could it potentially change in the upcoming years, considering it now has boots on the ground in Nagorno-Karabakh? Again, open to either of you.
Well, I think the major thing from an Armenia-centric perspective that we are going to witness is that Nagorno-Karabakh is now linking more and more of itself and its strategic issues, strategic questions with Russia. What we seem to be witnessing there is a sort of an acceptance of the local authorities from part of the Russian militaries that are on the ground. Consultations, that is very important for Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, because they are willing to remain a geopolitical factor in the region, so that they have lost a lot. Again, according to their, if we look at things from their point of view, they have lost a lot. But they hope to remain a geopolitical factor, and we sort of have the impression that is what we are seeing. From the Armenia perspective, as I was saying, the relations between Armenia and Russia are even more than before on an asymmetrical level. That asymmetry that was sort of I don't want to say openly challenged, because it was not the case, but that was tried to be corrected by Nikol Pashinyan leadership is now back full force. And it's still too early to predict how and if Armenia will be able to sort of mend this towards a more equal or balanced relationship. But I'm saying again, this is in the interest of, I think, every actors, because if we want to see finally some sort of change in the regional dynamics, and especially between Armenia and Azerbaijan, then these two states need to find more, first, more ways of discussing with each other, talking to each other, maybe directly, and that would be good for everyone's sovereignty, because Armenia has obviously a Russian dependence, but Azerbaijan has also now a Turkish dependence, and it has Russia and the Russian military on its territory. So it's not necessarily satisfactory for everyone here. They're there as well.
Maybe let's also talk about one of the other players, which has let's say re-emerged within the region, which is Turkey. And one of the questions we received is that there is some talk on the Turkish side of the situation that they might reopen the border between Turkey and Armenia, because apparently the Turkish and the Azerbaijan, the Turks consider the Nagorno-Karabakh issue resolved, or at least partially resolved.
Mhm.
Is this prospect, so the reopening of the borders between Turkey and Armenia, which was already talk of discussion years ago, realistic in the short term, or not so much? No predictions.
Sorry.
Doesn't have to be a prediction, but
Okay, it's not that I don't want to. It's not that I don't want to answer. I can share. There would need. Yeah. Okay. Let's put it this way: if Turkey and Armenia have or can find some sort of a mutual ground in order to maybe not right away establish or open all the borders if it's too soon for one or the other, but start at least talking to each other, as I was saying for Azerbaijan, I think it would be to the benefit of everyone. And yes, Turkey has made that overture, so it might be too early for Armenia to consider, because if, taking into account the fact that Turkey was a direct supporter, a very offensive supporter of Azerbaijan in the recent war, and taking into account the declarations that were made regarding the genocide of the Armenians and the necessity to continue and so on and so forth, it might come as too early for Armenia, or something that would be felt as, artificially created. Having said that, it would be, I think, constructive to find something an issue of direct conversation between the two, something that could be easily solved or easily dealt with, and that would put relations on a new track. But that would be for these leaders to decide, I guess.
Maybe to quickly follow up on the influence of Turkey within the region. What will its position be in the upcoming period? Can you imagine?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The influence or the evolution of the influence of Turkey within the region
in the coming years, or previously?
In the coming years.
It very probably it will grow. But this last NK war has made the South Caucasus part of the Middle East, sort of, which was not the case before, is now more the case. So it's another place where Turkey and Russia are sort of dealing directly. Again, there are ways to sort of make all these outside actors on a more balanced footing. As I was saying, there is the international organizations, some international organizations involvement that should rise, the OSCE Minsk group that should come back, and so on and so forth, and that might balance. It's never good for the South Caucasus when only Turkey and Russia are deciding its fate. I mean, personal opinion again, but so balancing is better.
Maybe the final question, there's still a couple of our smaller questions as well that are in the chat, but we unfortunately won't be able to respond to. But we talked in the beginning also about the influence of the diaspora, that were different priorities and not always successful cooperation. But how could the diaspora actually help the situation in Armenia? So to be both to overcome it sometimes being a burden, to also really be able to actively contribute. So how could they get involved in the political life, and would this actually be welcomed by the local population in Armenia in general? So maybe Ella, if you have any comments about this as well, please don't hesitate to come in.
I believe human resource is viewed as sort of support that will be very timely now, let's say, rather than, for instance, direct financial support. So human capital is now viewed as something that is crucial and necessary in within governance, within science, that is now to be boosted, or talks are ongoing to incorporate, for instance, science and military production. So I think for first and foremost, that's the human capital. I don't think now any lobbying or anything is expected from the diaspora, especially the Western diaspora, since the game has a little changed. And correct me on this one.
I agree with Ella. What is observable in Armenia in the last maybe since the Velvet Revolution, is that there is a will that the diaspora gets more involved, not as much financially as through human capital. Networks of cooperation in various domains, from technology to science, being an investor, in a nutshell, going from the donor model to a more partnership, if I can put it that way.
And of course, we will see how it works with the diaspora ministry as well, to see their influence there and how to build upon in the future.
Short notice, we don't have a diaspora ministry anymore. It was merged with the Ministry of Education and Science.
Okay, thank you for correcting, but it also shows the differing priorities now in the last couple of years. So also conscious of the time, we are at the very end of our presentation. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to Taline Papazian and Karagulyan for your contributions. We also see in the chat that it was very much appreciated. So thank you so much for joining us. Just before we end, any last comments you would like to make before we finalize?
Yes, well, I want to say obviously thank you to everyone. I wasn't able to follow the chat at the same time, but I have seen there are many comments. I would like to, throw you a ball, have a common conference between, on the theme of Azerbaijan and Armenia. And I have noticed, and I had talked about that with Gabriel before we set up all this. Yes, there is a tendency to sort of ethnicize conferences. Why? So maybe the second set of conference with direct discussions.
Between our, for example, Armenian and Azerbaijan.
Between Armenian scholars and Azerbaijan scholars, there are more concerns in common than what we might think. At the end of the day, these two countries are neighbors and they have to live together. They will it or not. So it could start through conferences. Why not?
Thank you.
Thank you. Definitely, we'll keep this idea and we'll try to organize a joint conference, because indeed, and this is something that could really help. I mean, things going forward, and the dialogue between academics, which is always an important cooperation axis. Well, I will let Dylan conclude, but thank you all for your attendance and your participation, active participation in this conference.
Yes, any final words also maybe to build upon what Taline said, because for example, the CRRC was also present in Azerbaijan until some time ago as well. So there was actually a cooperation that currently it's also in Georgia too, but from what I understand, there were some problems with the government that also caused it to not be able to function as it should. But I will let you please conclude in your own words.
There was, and there actually still is, a CRRC Azerbaijan. They just shifted their focus from conducting social research to providing more trainings and engaging in youth due to their internal political restrictions. We are in touch. We're still a regional, let's say, there is cooperation. We haven't been in touch although the last 6 months or so, or maybe a year. But
any final words, or otherwise we will.
Thank you for organizing this.
And actually, it will not be a joint conference between Armenia and Azeri contributors. However, next month, so back to back, we'll also be organizing in roughly the same format as today, a conference on Azerbaijan, looking at the apparent stability in the country and the challenges to ruling Aliyev clan. So this will be in the middle of March, Thursday, 18th 18th of March 2021. So looking forward to see you there. So we also please invite you to sign up to register rather through Eastern Circles if you haven't done so. And if not, obviously can follow us on Facebook and on LinkedIn as well. Thank you very much, Ella, Taline, the rest of the Eastern Circles editorial team, and of course all the participants here today. And we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
See you next month.